Faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books worldwide. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're diving into the book titled The Radiance of Humanity, The Lincoln Biography. The author is the famous psychologist and success expert Dale Carnegie. The inspiration came from a gossip piece he saw in a newspaper. So, that gossip described Lincoln's tragic marriage life. Carnegie realized his understanding of this great figure was very one-sided. So, he spent 10 years gathering materials, traveling to places Lincoln lived, and finally completed this biography. Lincoln was the 16th U.S. president. During his term, he ended the Civil War, prevented the nation's split, and abolished slavery. Due to his outstanding political achievements, Lincoln has been repeatedly ranked as the greatest president in American history. Lincoln's portrait is printed on the $5 bill. However, Carnegie didn't focus the narrative on Lincoln's political achievements. On the contrary, the book portrays Lincoln as deeply unfortunate throughout. His inner self wasn't strong, sometimes more fragile and melancholic than others. He often doubted himself and faced repeated failures. He didn't learn to read until 15. At 26, he nearly committed suicide after his first love died. By 46, he was still a poor lawyer. Even during his presidency, he faced constant crises. But facing all these misfortunes, Lincoln never stopped showing kindness to others because of his pain. He didn't shirk responsibilities due to fragility, nor harm others to escape his troubles. His whole life was unhappy, but he was always full of tolerance and compassion toward people and events. This is precisely the path to success that Carnegie, the success master, aims to convey through this history of failures. So now, through this book and with Carnegie, let's step into Lincoln's story to see how he faced misfortunes and became a great president. Lincoln's life was marked by 4 unfortunate encounters. The first misfortune was his impoverished childhood. In February 1809, the dense forests of the American Midwest were shrouded in severe cold and heavy snow for a month. Our protagonist, Abraham Lincoln, was born deep in these forests, in a small log cabin built by hunters. Young Lincoln's mother was Nancy Hanks. She was an illegitimate child who never saw her father and was raised by her uncle. Nancy had no education and couldn't write. Combined with her poor background, she ended up marrying the most down-and-out man in the village. Thomas was an aimless wanderer with no real skills. After marriage, the family survived only on his odd jobs in hunting. Life was extremely tough. Sometimes during harsh winters, with poor harvests, they couldn't afford vegetables or milk and survived only on nuts fallen from trees. But young Lincoln quickly grew accustomed to this hardship. During heavy snowstorms, he felt happy just curling up beside his mother like a puppy for warmth. Yet greater misfortunes soon struck Lincoln's family. When he was 9, Nancy suddenly contracted a hard-to-treat epidemic disease. Thomas was a superstitious man. On the day Nancy fell ill, he heard a dog crying outside for hours, took it as a bad omen, became convinced she wouldn't survive, and abandoned all attempts to treat her. Under these circumstances, Nancy soon died, tormented by despair and illness. His mother's death brought enormous change to young Lincoln's life. Father Thomas was rarely home, careless by nature, and never showed concern for his children. Young Lincoln had to bear his mother's loss alone and learn to care for himself. He quickly learned basic chores like laundry and cooking, but without a woman in the house, it became filthy and chaotic. Father and son often wore rags, never bathed in winter, and became especially foul-smelling in summer. Things only improved a year later when Thomas remarried. This painful experience deeply shaped Lincoln's lonely, melancholic nature, forming the foundation of his lifelong character. His mother's plight filled him with compassion for the vulnerable, always extending help when possible. Once during a move, they crossed a river with a swift current where one slip could sweep you away. A whole family made it across, but their little dog was left stranded on the other side. No one would risk it for a dog except young Lincoln, who waded through the rushing water to carry it over. Lincoln recalled he couldn't bear to abandon the dog and leave it there alone. A silver lining came when Lincoln was 15. Someone opened a simple school in that forest area. Young Lincoln finally got to learn reading. He cherished this deeply, writing on wooden boards when paper was scarce, copying textbooks by hand when he couldn't afford them. He borrowed books everywhere: history, literature, politics, even joke books, and devoured them voraciously. Reading opened a new world for Lincoln. He wanted to become an outstanding orator. He said Shakespeare didn't go to college, yet he became a great playwright. Why can't I? But reading and writing were useless for a life of farming and hunting. Father Thomas constantly scolded Lincoln for being lazy, telling him to stop doing such foolish things, and even beat him publicly for it. This wasn't the first time Thomas had laid hands on Lincoln. Though after his mother's death, Lincoln and his father relied on each other for years. Thomas had a bad temper. He was also harsh to Lincoln. Their relationship was terrible. The coldness and hostility between father and son were a source of pain for Lincoln throughout his childhood and life. As an adult, Lincoln rarely interacted with his father. Even when Thomas was critically ill and died, Lincoln didn't visit him for a final farewell. Lincoln said, "Even if we met, we wouldn't get along peacefully. It might cause bigger conflicts and make us both more miserable." Fortunately, Thomas's opposition didn't extinguish Lincoln's passion for learning. He continued to do as he pleased. While herding cows, he would recite lines from Hamlet as he walked. While doing farm work, he would hold a joke book and tell jokes to the farmers, making everyone laugh. In his free time, he ran to the town courthouse, dozens of kilometers away, to listen to lawyers debate. In fact, the total formal education Lincoln received in his life didn't exceed 12 months. His genius level speaking skills and rich knowledge in law and politics all came from self-study. Unnominated as a presidential candidate, Lincoln once said, "My schooling was very brief. Any achievements I have now are because I realized the importance of knowledge and accumulated it through constant self-study." Knowledge gave Lincoln the courage to change his circumstances. He had long grown tired of farming life and decided to find a job that involved interacting with more people, hoping to achieve great things with his oratory talent. That Lincoln's career was repeatedly plagued by hardships, which became the second misfortune of his life. Lincoln's first job was as a boatman, responsible for transporting timber cut from the forests to downstream shipyards. These days, drifting on the river weren't peaceful. The dense forests made security along the river very poor. One night, Lincoln's boat encountered a group of black outlaws who brandished knives and clubs, threatening to kill all crew members. 88, though they narrowly escaped, Lincoln was struck by a knife on his forehead, leaving a deep scar above his right eye. But this dangerous encounter didn't make Lincoln hate black people. On the contrary, when he saw plantation owners chaining and whipping black slaves or people trading them like livestock, he felt profound heartache and anger. He told his shipmates, "If I get the chance, I will make slavery disappear." Due to his diligent work ethic, Lincoln was soon promoted. His boss assigned him to work as a clerk at the company's general store, while also managing a bone meal factory and sawmill. In New Salem, Illinois, where Lincoln lived for 6 years, his life underwent tremendous transformation. New Salem had an independent literary society, and Lincoln, an avid reader, quickly became its driving force. At gatherings, he would tell stories to everyone. He recited his own poems publicly and could instantly comment on everything from forestry to current political events. These valuable experiences not only broadened Lincoln's horizons, but also boosted his confidence in his speaking abilities. Lincoln decided to run for Illinois state legislator and prepared his first formal campaign speech. In its conclusion, he wrote, "Born at the bottom of society, I run for office with no influential relatives to help me, but I'm accustomed to disappointment. If you deem me unfit for prominence, I won't hold resentment." Lincoln lost this election, but began making a name for himself, gradually gaining local acceptance and recognition. Beyond his speaking talents, Lincoln's character earned tremendous respect. After saving some money, Lincoln partnered with a friend to open a small general store. But due to poor management, the store soon went bankrupt and incurred massive debts. When his alcoholic partner died, Lincoln could have used legal loopholes to avoid some debt, but resolutely took full responsibility. Even 14 years later, while serving as a congressman, Lincoln was still repaying this debt regularly. After bankruptcy, Lincoln found a part-time job collecting postal fees. These fees would stay with Lincoln for a while before being submitted to the post office. He could have easily embezzled some money first and paid it back slowly later, but even when life was extremely difficult, Lincoln never misappropriated a single cent from the post office. When postal auditors came to collect, Lincoln always handed over the exact coins he had collected. Um, During this period, Lincoln taught himself the complete legal commentary, a book he found in the trash at a general store. After acquiring legal knowledge, Lincoln took a job as a law clerk. He excelled in this role, soon opening his own law practice. Though law was lucrative, Lincoln charged very low fees. For this, he was often accused by colleagues of disrupting market prices. Lincoln explained that many clients were as poor as he was, and charging too much troubled his conscience. Though his law career flourished, Lincoln didn't stop pursuing politics. 2 years after his first failed campaign, that is, Lincoln, at 25, he was finally elected state legislator and served 3 consecutive terms. This was one of the rare smooth periods in Lincoln's life, but misfortune struck him again soon. He had accumulated experience as a state legislator. Afterwards, in 1847, the 38-year-old Lincoln was elected to Congress and came to Washington for the first time. When Lincoln entered Congress, America was at war with Mexico. An aggressive war deliberately started to expand slavery. Lincoln opposed this war. He declared in a speech, "This war has forgotten its mission to protect the innocent, weak. It's mere plunder and murder, utterly without glory." Though Congress ignored Lincoln, this speech provoked fury and hatred among his constituents. 6,000 Illinois men fought in this war, believing in its righteousness. It couldn't tolerate their elected representative. Their representative called them murderers. Lincoln knew the gravity of this. He said, "I'm committing political suicide now, but I can't ignore my conscience to support this war." And thus, amid hometown protests, Lincoln was forced out of Congress and lost the reputation built over a decade. He felt his political life was over, returning in disgrace to his dusty law office to resume practice. This was the darkest time in Lincoln's life. People who knew him said that from then on, an expression of sadness and worry became Lincoln's most noticeable trait. So, how did Lincoln deal with this pain? He didn't do anything special. He just carried on as usual, reading books, handling cases, telling jokes like before, making everyone around him laugh out loud. Author Carnegie wrote that he chose to endure everything alone. He solidified his pain and set it aside, never letting emotions control his actions or hurt others. Just like that, Lincoln lived in obscurity for 6 years, during which the debate over slavery grew fiercer in America. In 1854, Lincoln's former political opponent, Douglas, proposed the repeal of the Missouri Compromise, and it was passed by Congress. It was a policy that constrained slavery. It stipulated that slavery wasn't allowed in the Western territories north of Missouri. Now its repeal meant slavery would run rampant across the vast Western territories. Hearing this news, Lincoln was furious. He challenged Douglas, delivering a carefully prepared speech that refuted Douglas's arguments point by point and reflected deeply on slavery. This brilliant speech brought Lincoln back into the public eye, and his popularity began to rise. But in the subsequent state legislature election, Lincoln still lost. Dejected and defeated, Lincoln returned to his office. The courage he'd mustered seemed all gone, and he sat dazed all night. Well, his first words upon speaking were to his roommate, "I tell you, a nation half slave and half free cannot last forever. I'll make slavery impossible to continue." In the summer of 1858, Lincoln ran for office again. After many failures, fortune seemed to finally smile on him. This election went unusually smoothly in every way. 2 years later, at 51, Lincoln was nominated as a presidential candidate and ultimately elected as the 16th President of the United States. But this radiant presidency became the third misfortune in Lincoln's life. Lincoln's presidential career was riddled with crises and hardships. Though he ultimately fulfilled his duties, gaining immortal glory and fame, he paid for it with his life. When Lincoln served as president, it was America's most turbulent time. The nation was divided into two hostile camps. Southern states, representing plantation owners' interests, supported slavery, while northern states advocated abolishing it. Okay, within 2 months of Lincoln's election, 7 southern states declared independence, formed the Confederacy, and began preparing for civil war, plunging America into crisis. Lincoln understood that only by confronting and winning could the nation be saved. Yet he hadn't abandoned hope for peace. In his subsequent inaugural address, Lincoln still appealed to the Confederacy for peace. He said, "I don't want war between us. We are friends, not enemies. We must not be hostile toward each other. Though emotions may hurt feelings, our bonds cannot be severed." The bullets were already loaded, and nothing could stop it. In April 1861, the American Civil War erupted between the Confederacy, demanding independence and slavery, and Lincoln's Union, opposing secession and slavery. The war situation was highly complex. Initially, the Northern Army suffered repeated defeats. At the most critical point, Washington nearly fell. Secretary of War Stanton prepared to relocate the federal government to New York. The Treasury's gold and silver in Washington were moved to Wall Street. Successive failures brought Lincoln condemnation and criticism nationwide. In just months, he lost 40 pounds, becoming extremely anxious and depressed, constantly sighing, "What should I do?" Lost again. What troubled Lincoln wasn't just battlefield losses, but also his cabinet members. These political veterans didn't take Lincoln seriously, viewing him as inexperienced and a poor leader. They weren't aligned with him on governance, creating internal strife amid external threats. Lincoln had to unite the cabinet. How did he do it? Let's learn through his interactions with key ministers. First was Treasury Secretary Chase. Before politics, Chase was a scholar fluent in 3 languages. Though outwardly respectful, he privately looked down on Lincoln's hunter origins. Disparaging the new president's limited schooling, Chase secretly incited opposition against Lincoln while scheming for the White House. She promised more benefits if he became president. Lincoln rejected the proposal, saying, "Chase is a highly capable man. As long as he performs well as Treasury Secretary, I won't mind his White House ambitions at all." However, Chase didn't grasp Lincoln's magnanimity and intentions. On the contrary, at the slightest setback, she'd threatened resignation. He submitted 5 resignation letters to Lincoln. Each time, Lincoln repeatedly persuaded him to stay and serve the nation. But when Chase submitted his 6th resignation, Lincoln approved it. Because while he could tolerate offense, he couldn't allow officials to use duty as bargaining chips. Even so, Lincoln gave Chase the highest honor a U.S. president could bestow, appointing him Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The second was Secretary of War Stanton. Unlike Seward and Chase, Stanton was short, obese, and had a volatile, eccentric personality. Stanton and Lincoln met while working on a legal case as co-counsel, but from their first meeting, Stanton despised Lincoln, mocking his appearance and calling him a clumsy orangutan. After Lincoln became president, Stanton didn't restrain himself, publicly declaring Lincoln was a gorilla scratching itself on the White House throne. Though Stanton's insults deeply hurt Lincoln, when meeting a war secretary during turmoil, Lincoln immediately thought of him. He said, "I'm determined to set aside all personal pride and appoint Stanton." Lincoln's wisdom in recognizing talent, magnanimity, and prioritization of national interests gradually moved the rigid Stanton. After Lincoln's assassination, this Iron Man wept, saying, "Here lies the most perfect leader humanity has ever known." As Lincoln gradually unified his cabinet and established strong leadership, the 18-month war stalemate between North and South began shifting. Now, the Confederacy planned treaties with Britain and France to seek their support. If successful, the Union Army would face dire circumstances. Under these conditions, Lincoln finally resolved to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Why did Lincoln wait until now? Though Lincoln deeply hated slavery and wished this evil system gone, as president, he'd sought gradual emancipation through compensated release. Only this could secure border state support and increase victory chances. Lincoln realized his primary duty was to ensure the safety of the Union and national unity. He believed that if the Union perished, slavery would persist longer across America. But now things were different. To prevent British and French intervention, Lincoln had to change Europe's view of the American Civil War. He knew European society widely regarded slavery as evil. Once the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, it would transform the war from merely an internal conflict to prevent secession into a victorious battle to destroy slavery. By then, powerful public opinion would force Britain and France to stop aiding the Confederacy. In 1862, in September, Lincoln formally proposed the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet. He knew it was a risky decision, so when proposing it, the typically humble Lincoln told cabinet members, "I haven't discussed this with any of you, but I have sworn to myself and to God about the proclamation. In its entirety, I personally wish to make no changes. I have decided to proceed this way." After the proclamation was issued, the situation worsened temporarily. The Confederacy became unprecedentedly united and enraged, while the Union faced mutinies as many white soldiers refused to fight and die for black rights. The Army's defeats led opponents to fiercely attack Lincoln, pressuring him to resign. Lincoln silently bore all the blame. Before issuing the proclamation, he had prepared for the worst. He said, "Either preserve the noble cause or sadly lose the world's last best hope." Fortunately, a turning point emerged. At the most desperate moment, the Confederate commander made a fatal war error. The main army was destroyed. Meanwhile, the Emancipation Proclamation's power gradually emerged. Public opinion shifted to support Lincoln, blacks joined the Union Army, and the South's defeat became inevitable. In 1865, the Confederacy surrendered. This 4-year war with 500,000 casualties ended quietly. No parades of disarmed prisoners, no humiliating surrender ceremony, no executions of rebels. Confederate officers kept their weapons. Soldiers went directly home. These lenient measures were personally ordered by Lincoln. Even during the war's harshest times, he never abandoned his inner compassion and tolerance. He ordered the release of soldiers sentenced to execution for desertion due to homesickness and fear. Lincoln said, "I believe if I were on the battlefield, I'd probably drop my gun and run too." His pardon list spanned multiple pages, earning him harsh berating from Secretary of War Stanton. Due to exceptional leadership, courage, and compassion shown during the war, Lincoln was re-elected president, and gained immense public prestige. But misfortune struck him once more. In 1864, 54-year-old Lincoln was shot and killed while attending a theater performance. The assassin was a deranged actor craving fame through Lincoln's prominence. Thus ended Lincoln's life. People spontaneously held grand memorials, with some youths even committing suicide to join him. But handling his remains became problematic. With Mary Todd Lincoln's consent, people decided to bury him in his hometown, specially constructing a mausoleum. Yet during the funeral, Mary suddenly erupted, overturning the plan and demanding a different burial site. Because a Mr. Mather had once offended Mary, and the mausoleum happened to be on Mather Street. Though Mary's reasons seemed absurd, people complied, exhuming Lincoln's body and reburying it elsewhere. What kind of person was Mary? And what about Lincoln's family life? In this book, Carnegie writes, "For Lincoln, life's greatest tragedy wasn't assassination. It was marrying Mary." Todd. Now, let's examine Lincoln's fourth misfortune, his troubled family life. Before meeting Mary, Lincoln had a sweet first love named Anne, daughter of a small innkeeper. They deeply loved each other, pledging to marry once he became a lawyer. But just 1 year before Lincoln became a lawyer, Anne died of illness. Anne's death plunged Lincoln into agony. He developed neurasthenia, an illness that tormented him lifelong. Years later, speaking of Anne, Lincoln still said sadly, "People think I've recovered well enough to live happily, but only I know that privately, I'm still so distressed I avoid carrying knives, fearing I'd lose control." But Lincoln's misfortune didn't end there. 4 years after Anne's death, Lincoln met Mary Todd, a proud, fiery socialite determined to marry a president. Lincoln was then an Illinois state legislator. After hearing Lincoln speak, Mary recognized his talent and began pursuing him. Believing he'd found love, Lincoln proposed quickly, but ultimately didn't show at their wedding. He fled. After the proposal, Mary dropped her romantic facade and launched a campaign to refine Lincoln, demanding aristocratic manners from dress to behavior. Realizing his terrible mistake, Lincoln tried canceling multiple times but couldn't confront Mary's tears, fleeing instead on the wedding day. This became Lincoln's only act of cowardice that hurt others, costing him lifelong happiness. As penance, Mary later claimed Lincoln ruined her by leaving her unwed, pressuring him to take responsibility. Torn between emotion and duty, Lincoln compromised, marrying Mary, who remained perpetually dissatisfied despite her victory. Mary soon deemed Lincoln useless, slovenly, and weak, regularly scolding and hitting him. Even after Lincoln became president, Mary publicly berated him multiple times. During meals, she'd throw hot coffee in his face merely because she was in a bad mood. Lincoln would silently wipe himself dry without a word. Mary despised Lincoln's roots, banning his relatives from their home. Lincoln was close to a stepmother who lived nearby, but Mary's opposition prevented her from ever entering their house, a source of deep grief for Lincoln. Mary was intensely jealous. She barred Lincoln from dancing with women, demanded approval for conversations, and threw fits otherwise. This tragic home life exhausted Lincoln. He once told Mary sorrowfully, "You'll destroy my life. You've turned this home into hell." But even so, he never hit Mary or chose divorce. Besides his wife, what pained Lincoln more deeply were his children. 3 of Lincoln's 4 children died at young ages. When his second child, Willie, died, it was during the Civil War's most critical phase. The pain of losing a son and political pressure nearly broke the already neurasthenic Lincoln. His personal doctor feared he wouldn't survive. Mary not only failed to help, but invited so-called spiritualists to conduct seances in the White House, creating chaos. During that time, Lincoln could only release his emotions by reciting poetry. He'd spend hours in his office loudly reading Shakespeare. When reaching King John's passages, "Mourning a Dead Son," He'd sob uncontrollably at his desk. But Lincoln didn't wallow in his sorrow. He thought of parents who'd lost children in the war, deeply sympathized, and often wrote them personal letters of comfort. This care for others became Lincoln's strength to overcome misfortune. Here we conclude Lincoln's story. We've learned about his adversities and how he faced misfortune. Lincoln once said, "After I die, I hope someone will say, wherever he could, he plucked thorns and planted flowers." Though not everyone becomes a great president, everyone faces hardships. Then Lincoln's qualities of tolerance, empathy, and endurance become our strength to overcome difficulties. As this book's title reminds us, this radiance of humanity exists in everyone. This concludes our interpretation of Lincoln's biography. Find keynotes below the audio. See you tomorrow.